Ethan had always felt like he was walking through life with no place to stop, no door to knock on, and no voice calling his name. At just 14, he had already lived in more towns than most people visited in their lifetime. He carried everything he owned in a small, worn-out backpack: a thin blanket, an empty notebook, a pencil that was almost too short to use, and a few memories he never talked about. Most nights, he slept in abandoned sheds or under old porches, anywhere he could crawl into without being seen. He wasn't running away from anything anymore. He was simply trying to survive each day as it came. People in different towns knew him only as the quiet boy, or that kid who helps with chores for food. When someone needed firewood, Ethan chopped it. When someone needed a fence mended, he fixed it. He never asked for money. A warm meal or a chance to sleep safely for a night was enough. He didn't expect kindness from others, but he offered it whenever he could, hoping that someday life might return it to him. One cold evening, he walked along a narrow dirt path near the base of the mountains. The sky was turning a deep shade of blue, and the air felt sharper with every breath he took. Winter was slowly creeping in, and Ethan knew the nights would only get colder. His thin jacket didn't help much, but he pulled it tighter around him as he walked. He was hoping to find an empty shed or a sheltered tree where he could rest before darkness fully settled. The wind whispered through the branches above him, carrying the smell of pine and earth. Ethan heard it all: the rustling leaves, the soft echo of his own footsteps. But then, something new cut through the quiet. A faint sound, almost like a cry, drifted toward him. He stopped walking and listened. At first, he thought it was the wind, but it came again, soft and shaky, like someone weakly calling out. He looked around, unsure of what he had heard. Most people would have ignored it or hurried away, especially with night approaching. But Ethan wasn't like most people. Even though he lived with so little, his heart was full of compassion. If someone needed help, he couldn't walk away. He followed the sound, stepping carefully over rocks and fallen branches. The sky was getting darker, but his eyes adjusted quickly. The cry came again, this time a little clearer. It guided him toward a steep, rocky slope near the edge of the mountain. At the base of the slope, he saw her, a young girl, maybe around his age, dressed in traditional clothing decorated with patterns he didn't recognize. Her long, dark hair was tangled with leaves, and her ankle looked twisted at a strange angle. She was sitting on the ground, leaning against a large rock, breathing heavily as if she had been calling for help for a long time. Ethan rushed toward her, not wanting to frighten her but knowing she needed help immediately. When she noticed him, her eyes widened with fear, but she didn't move. She looked too exhausted to run, even if she wanted to. "It's okay," Ethan said gently. "I'm not here to hurt you. I heard you calling." The girl stared at him for a moment before speaking. Her voice was soft and tired. "I slipped. I couldn't get up." Ethan knelt beside her and examined her ankle carefully. It was swollen, and she winced when he touched it. He knew it wasn't broken, but walking on it would be difficult. He also noticed how cold her hands were. The temperature was dropping fast, and she must have been out there for hours. "Can you walk if I help you?" he asked. She shook her head slowly. "I tried. It hurts too much." Ethan thought for a moment. He didn't have much, but he had his blanket. He took it out of his backpack and wrapped it around her shoulders. She looked at him with surprise, as if she didn't expect a stranger, especially a homeless boy, to show her such kindness. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Ayana," she whispered. "I'm Ethan," he replied with a small smile. "We'll get you out of here." Ayana explained that she had been traveling with her tribe through the mountains, but she wandered too far from the group while gathering herbs. The ground was slippery, and she fell. By the time she tried to stand, the pain in her ankle was too strong, and the tribe had moved too far ahead to hear her calls. Ethan listened while helping her sit more comfortably. He could tell she was scared, but she was brave enough to keep calm. The mountains ahead were dark, cold, and dangerous, especially at night. Ethan knew the path well enough to understand the risks. Still, leaving Ayana alone wasn't an option. He couldn't imagine what would happen to her if he walked away. And even though he had spent years alone, he didn't want anyone else to feel that kind of loneliness, not even for a night. He gently helped Ayanna stand, letting her lean on him. She tried to take a step, but pain shot through her leg. Ethan didn't hesitate. He crouched down in front of her. "Get on my back," he said. "What?" Ayanna blinked. Surprised. "You can't walk like this. You'll get tired." "I'm used to walking," Ethan replied with a small chuckle. "Come on. It's either this, or we freeze here." After a moment, she slowly climbed onto his back. Ethan adjusted her weight, making sure she felt secure, and then began the climb up the mountain trail. The path was uneven and steep, but he moved carefully. Step by step, the night grew colder. The wind pushed against him, and his hands felt numb, but he didn't stop. Ayanna was quiet, but Ethan could feel her soft, steady breaths behind his ear. He hoped it meant she felt safer now. As they climbed, Ethan thought about all the nights he had spent alone. No one had ever carried him, protected him, or stayed by his side when he needed help. Yet here he was, carrying someone he had just met because he couldn't bear the thought of her being hurt or afraid. After nearly an hour of climbing, he found a large fallen tree with a hollow space beneath it. It wasn't much, but it offered shelter from the wind. He gently set Ayanna down and helped her sit inside. He placed his blanket over her again and then sat beside her, rubbing his hands to warm them. "You're very kind," Ayanna said softly. "Most people would have walked away." Ethan shrugged lightly. "Maybe. But I wouldn't want to be left alone like that." Ayanna looked at him carefully, as if trying to understand him. "You live alone?" "Most of the time," Ethan replied, trying to keep his voice light. "I move around. Stay where I can. It must be hard." Ethan gave a small smile. "Sometimes, but I manage." They sat quietly for a while, listening to the distant howl of the wind. Ayanna's breathing slowed, and Ethan could tell she was growing more comfortable. He felt tired too, but he stayed awake, keeping an ear out for danger. As the night deepened, Ayanna spoke again, her voice soft and sincere. "I don't know what would have happened if you didn't come." "You don't have to thank me," he said gently. "I'm just glad I heard you." She smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting the dim moonlight. "My people believe that some paths cross for a reason. Maybe this was meant to happen." Ethan didn't know whether he believed in fate, but hearing her say that made something warm grow inside him, a feeling he hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe kindness had a way of finding people who needed it most. He watched the stars until his eyes grew heavy. Though the night was cold, something in the quiet space beside Ayanna felt peaceful. For the first time in many months, Ethan didn't feel entirely alone. He felt like someone saw him not as a homeless boy wandering from place to place, but as someone who mattered. Without realizing it, he drifted into a light sleep, sitting beside the girl he had rescued, unaware that this single act of kindness would change his life forever and bring the next morning more than he could ever imagine. The first cold light of morning slipped through the branches when Ethan slowly opened his eyes. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Then he saw Ayanna sleeping beside him, wrapped in his thin blanket, her breathing soft and calm. The memory of the previous night returned to him: the climb, the cold wind, the fear in her eyes, and the relief when they found shelter. He felt a quiet sense of responsibility settle over him. She was counting on him, and he couldn't let her down. He stepped out from under the fallen tree and looked at the sky. The clouds were gray, thin, and stretching across the mountains like long sheets of smoke. It meant the weather could change quickly. They needed to move before the cold became dangerous. He glanced at Ayanna's ankle, remembering how swollen it had been. She wouldn't be able to walk far, but they had no choice except to keep going. Ayanna woke up soon after, rubbing her eyes with a faint smile. She looked warmer than last night, which made Ethan feel relieved. "Morning," she said softly. "Morning," he replied. "How's your ankle?" She tried moving it gently and winced a little. "It still hurts." "We'll take it slow," Ethan said. We need to keep going. Your tribe is somewhere on the other side of the mountain. Ayana nodded. Even though her face showed worry, there was also trust. She believed Ethan would get her there. And that belief felt strange, yet comforting to him. He wasn't used to people depending on him. He helped her stand, supporting her weight carefully. The wind was stronger now, brushing past their faces like cold fingers. The path ahead twisted upward between tall, jagged rocks. Frost clung to the edges of leaves, and patches of snow lay scattered between bushes. It was a harsh place for anyone, let alone a girl with an injured ankle. "Get on my back again," Ethan said. "It's safer." She hesitated. "I don't want you to get tired. I'd rather get tired than let you get hurt," he replied with a light smile. Her expression softened, and she climbed onto his back once more. Ethan adjusted her weight and began walking up the narrow trail. His legs ached, and the cold air made his breathing heavy, but he pushed forward steadily. Every step brought a new challenge, a loose rock here, a slippery patch of frost there, but Ethan stayed careful and focused. Ayana watched the mountains around them. "I didn't know someone my age could be this strong," she said quietly. Ethan shook his head slightly. "I don't think I'm strong. I just keep going because I have to." "But you help even when you don't have much," she replied. "That is strength too." Her words warmed him more than the weak morning sun. It had been a long time since anyone said something kind to him. As the trail grew steeper, Ethan stopped for a moment to rest. He set Ayana down on a flat rock and caught his breath. She looked around with worry in her eyes. "I should tell you something," she said softly. "My tribe. They worry a lot when someone goes missing. They will search for me. They must be close." "That's good," Ethan said. "We'll find them. But the mountains can hide sounds. Even if they call, we may not hear them." Her voice trembled slightly. Ethan looked at her with firmness. "We'll try. Don't lose hope." They continued their journey, climbing slowly. The sky brightened, but the cold stayed. Birds flew overhead, circling the treetops as if guiding them. A gentle breeze carried the scent of wet earth and pine needles. After a long hour of walking, they reached a narrow wooden bridge stretched across a deep gap between rocks. The wood looked old and unsteady. Ethan tested it with his foot. It creaked but didn't break. Still, crossing it would be difficult, especially with Ayana on his back. "You stay here," he said. "I'll take your weight." Little by little, he guided her carefully across, step by step. The wood groaned under their feet, but Ethan stayed patient and calm. When they reached the other side safely, Ayana let out a long breath of relief. "You really don't give up, do you?" she asked with a tired smile. "I can't," he replied simply. "Not when someone needs me." They moved deeper into the mountains, stopping occasionally so Ayana could rest. Ethan helped her drink water from a small stream that ran down from the rocks. The water was cold, fresh, and clear. It gave them both renewed energy. As they continued, the sky slowly darkened again, not with night, but with clouds. Snowflakes began drifting down, landing softly on their hair and clothes. Ayana looked up at the sky worriedly. "It's snowing earlier than usual," she said. "We need to find shelter soon." Ethan nodded. He scanned the area, looking for a cave or an overhang. After a few minutes of searching, he spotted a large stone ledge with a dry space beneath it. It wasn't perfect, but it would keep them safe from the snow. They settled there, and Ethan cleaned Ayana's ankle gently, using water from the stream. She winced, but she didn't complain. He tore a strip from his shirt and wrapped it around her ankle to give it support. "You're very brave," he said. Ayana smiled weakly. "I feel braver because you're here." Ethan felt something warm spread through him again, something that pushed away the cold and the tiredness. He wasn't used to hearing such words. For so long, he had been treated as invisible. But here, with Ayana, he felt seen. They talked quietly as the snow fell around them. Ayana told him about her tribe, their traditions, the stories they shared around fires at night. the way they traveled with the seasons. Ethan listened with wonder. He had never stayed anywhere long enough to feel connected to a group. Ayana's stories made him imagine what it might be like to belong somewhere. When she finished, she looked at him and asked gently, "What about you? Where is your family?" Ethan hesitated. He didn't want to bring sadness into the moment. "I don't really have one anymore," he said softly. "I've been on my own for a while." Ayana's eyes softened with empathy. "That must be lonely." "Sometimes," he admitted. "But helping you, it doesn't feel lonely." She smiled, and for a moment, the cold world outside the shelter felt warm. The snow slowed later in the afternoon, and Ethan decided it was safe to continue. Ayana climbed on his back again, and he stepped out from under the ledge. The landscape looked peaceful with a thin layer of snow covering it like a white blanket. But peaceful didn't mean easy. The snow made the ground slippery, and he had to move even more carefully. Hours passed slowly. Ethan's legs burned with exhaustion, but he didn't stop. Ayana stayed quiet, sensing his struggle. She rested her cheek softly against his shoulder, trusting him completely. At last, they reached a high point on the trail where they could see far ahead. Smoke rose faintly in the distance, curling upward into the sky. Ayana gasped. "That could be my tribe." They must have made a temporary camp. Tribe? Ethan felt hope rise inside him. They were close. He started down the trail, but the path grew rough again. He almost slipped once, catching himself just in time. Ayana held onto him tightly, whispering, "Be careful." "I will," he assured her. By the time they reached the base of the hill, it was nearing evening. The air filled with the smell of smoke and distant cooking. Ayana lifted her head, excitement shining in her eyes. But when they reached the area where the smoke had been rising, they found only burnt-out fire pits and footprints in the snow. The tribe had already moved on. Ayana's smile faded slowly. They were here, but they left. They must still be searching for me. Ethan felt her disappointment like a weight on his chest. He gently helped her sit on a rock. She looked tired, cold, and worried. Yet she kept holding on to hope. Ethan built a small fire using fallen branches. Ayana watched him with gratitude as the warm flames flickered. He helped her warm her hands and gave her the rest of his water. "We'll signal them," he said firmly. "Fire smoke can be seen from far away. Someone will come." Ayana nodded. Her eyes glistened softly, not with fear, but with trust. "You've done so much for me, Ethan. I won't forget it." Ethan looked at the smoke rising into the darkening sky. He didn't say it out loud, but he hoped her tribe truly would see it. Not because he wanted a reward, but because Ayana deserved to be safe. As the fire crackled softly, the two of them sat side by side, unaware that by morning, their lives would change in a way neither could imagine. The night settled quietly around Ethan and Ayana as they sat beside the small fire he had built. The flames flickered gently, casting warm light on their tired faces. Ayana held her hands close to the fire, letting the warmth soak into her cold fingers. Ethan watched the smoke rise and disappear into the dark sky, hoping someone from her tribe might see it. Every few minutes he glanced around, listening for any distant voices or footsteps. But the mountains remained silent. Ethan knew he couldn't stay awake all night, but he also knew he couldn't sleep deeply. He had to stay alert. The mountains could be unpredictable, and Ayana needed him. She sensed his worry and spoke softly. "You can rest for a little while," she told him. "I'll keep the fire going." Ethan shook his head slowly. "I'll rest later. You should sleep first. You've had a harder day than I have." Ayana smiled faintly, appreciating his kindness. "It's strange," she whispered. "Even though I'm far from my tribe, I don't feel scared anymore." "Why?" Ethan asked, curious. "Because you're with me," she said simply. The words touched Ethan deeply. No one had ever said something like that to him. He wasn't used to being someone people trusted or relied on. The idea warmed him more than the fire itself. Ayana's eyelids grew heavy, and soon she drifted into a peaceful sleep. Ethan pulled his blanket tighter around her shoulders and sat quietly, listening to the crackle of the fire and the soft sound of the wind. The mountains stretched around them like giant dark shadows, tall and silent. Ethan felt small in their presence, yet he also felt strangely calm. He wasn't alone anymore, not tonight. Hours went by slowly. Ethan's eyes grew heavy, but he kept fighting the tiredness. Sometimes he stood to stretch, sometimes he gathered more branches for the fire, and sometimes he simply watched Ayana to make sure she was warm enough. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he hoped they would find her tribe soon. She needed her people, and somewhere deep inside, he wondered if maybe he needed them too. Even though he didn't want to admit it. When dawn finally touched the sky, it came softly, turning the darkness into a pale silver light. The fire had burned low, and Ayana stirred awake. She opened her eyes slowly, then sat up, pulling the blanket around herself. "Did you sleep?" she asked. "A little," Ethan answered, though he had hardly closed his eyes. Ayana frowned gently. "You should have rested." "I'm all right," he replied with a small smile. "We can start moving again once we warm up." The snow around them sparkled under the early morning light. The world looked peaceful, almost gentle, even though they both knew the mountains could change at any moment. Ethan stood and checked the trail ahead. It wasn't too steep, but the fresh snow would make it difficult. Still, he didn't feel discouraged. The thought of Ayana reuniting with her people gave him strength. He helped her stand and supported her as they walked slowly. She could put a little more weight on her ankle now, but not much. She winced occasionally, but she stayed brave, taking steady breaths to manage the discomfort. As they walked, Ayana noticed something. "Ethan," she said softly, "you keep looking over your shoulder. Are you expecting someone to follow us?" Ethan shook his head. "Not really. I'm just careful. When you move from place to place, you learn to pay attention to everything." Ayana studied him for a moment. "You must have grown up fast." "Maybe," he said quietly. "Life didn't give me much choice." They walked in silence for a while. The air grew warmer as the sun rose higher, melting some of the snow on the ground. Birds began singing in the trees, filling the mountains with soft, hopeful sounds. Then Ethan saw something unusual in the distance, a long trail of footprints. They were spread out, as if many people had passed through recently. He pointed toward them. "Ayana, look, this must be your tribe's path." Her eyes widened with hope. "Yes, these are their tracks." They were going south. Ethan's heart lifted. Then we're close. They followed the footprints carefully. Sometimes the trail widened, where many steps overlapped, and sometimes it narrowed into a single line, where the tribe had walked in a calm and steady group. Ayana's excitement grew with every step. But Ethan noticed something else. A quiet sadness hiding behind her smile. "Are you all right?" he asked. She hesitated before answering. "Yes, I'm just thinking." "About what?" Ayana looked down at her wrapped ankle. "When they find me, they will take me home. And you'll go your own way again." Ethan didn't know what to say. Part of him wanted to tell her that he would be fine, that he was used to being alone. But another part of him felt something different, something heavier. The thought of walking away from her, after everything they had gone through, made his chest feel tight. "We'll see what happens," he said softly. They continued walking. The trail led them through a narrow valley where tall rocks rose on both sides like walls. The air felt colder there, and the wind echoed around them. Ethan kept Ayana close, making sure she didn't lose her footing. When they finally reached the end of the valley, they came upon another camp area. There were ashes from a recent fire, footprints, and a few broken branches, clear signs that people had been there not long ago. Ayana knelt beside the ashes and touched them carefully. "Still warm," she said. "They were here this morning." Ethan felt a surge of hope. Then they must be close. He helped her sit while he gathered dry sticks to rebuild a small fire. Ayana watched him move with calm confidence. She had grown to respect his strength, not just in his body, but in his heart. He had carried her, encouraged her, and cared for her with a gentle patience she rarely saw in anyone. When the fire was lit, they warmed themselves quietly. Ethan tilted his head back and watched the sky, wondering if smoke from their fire would be enough to draw the tribe's attention this time. He hoped so. Ayana wouldn't last many more days with her injured ankle, and he didn't want to risk climbing more dangerous terrain. After a while, Ayana spoke again, her voice soft. "Ethan, when I first met you, I was scared. I didn't know if you were someone I could trust." Ethan nodded. "I understand. But now," she continued, "I feel safe around you. You never made me feel like I was a burden. You treated me with respect." Ethan lowered his eyes, unsure how to respond to such heartfelt words. "You're not a burden," he said. "You're someone who needed help. Anyone would have done the same." Ayana smiled gently. "Not everyone would. But you did." Ethan stared at the fire, feeling emotions he didn't know how to name. No one had ever spoken so kindly to him. His life had been a long path of silence, shadows, and lonely evenings. But the last 2 days with Ayana had been different. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a stranger in his own world. The fire smoked gently, rising into the sky like a signal. They both watched it quietly. Ethan imagined the tribe, noticing the smoke, rushing toward it, calling Ayana's name with relief. He pictured her running toward them limping toward them and hugging her family. And he pictured himself stepping back, watching from a distance, then turning away to continue his wanderings. Ayana noticed his faraway expression. "You're thinking a lot," she said softly. "Just wondering what's next," Ethan replied. "Whatever happens," Ayana said, "I will never forget what you did for me." Ethan smiled gently. "That's enough for me." Evening approached slowly. The sky turned a soft orange, then pink, then purple. The fire crackled softly as the world around them grew quiet once more. Ethan felt tired, more tired than he had in a long time, but it was a peaceful kind of tiredness, the kind that came from doing something meaningful. As night fell, Ethan spotted an old cabin nearby. It was small and worn, with gaps in the walls and a roof that sagged a little, but it looked like it could provide shelter for the night. He helped Ayana inside, made her comfortable, and placed the blanket over her again. "This place will keep us warm," he said. Ayana nodded and smiled gratefully. "Thank you for everything." Ethan sat beside the door, leaning against the wall. He listened to the wind blowing softly outside, carrying the scent of pine trees. His eyes slowly grew heavy. And this time, he didn't fight the sleep. He trusted the quiet around them. He didn't know that while he slept, the smoke from their fire drifted through the mountains seen by eyes he didn't expect. And he certainly didn't know that the next morning, when he opened the cabin door, his life would change forever, because 30 warriors were already making their way toward him. The final chapter of Adil's journey began quietly, not with excitement or fear, but with a calm realization that life had changed him in ways he never expected. He stood near the small window of his room early in the morning, watching the soft sky grow brighter, and he felt something new inside him. It was not pride, not sadness, not even relief. It was a peaceful understanding that every challenge he faced had shaped him into someone stronger, wiser, and more patient. He knew that the road in front of him would not always be smooth, but now he had the confidence to walk on it without feeling lost. As he stepped out into the fresh air, Adil remembered the many days when he used to feel trapped in confusion, unsure of himself or his future. But now, those memories no longer hurt him. They felt like old stories from a different time. Stories that helped him learn who he truly was. He walked slowly, taking in the gentle sounds of the morning, the distant laughter of children going to school, the call of a fruit seller, and the warm smell of fresh bread from a nearby bakery. These small details reminded him that life, even in its quietest moments, held meaning. Adil's family had also started to notice the change in him. His mother, who once worried constantly about his choices and emotional state, now watched him with pride. She could see a new light in his eyes, something steady and grounded. His father, who often kept his feelings guarded, had begun speaking to him openly, offering advice, support, and gentle encouragement. Even his younger siblings, who used to tease him playfully, now came to him whenever they needed guidance or help. He had become someone people trusted, someone people felt safe around. But despite these positive changes, Adil knew that life was not finished testing him. One afternoon, he received a message from someone he had once cared for deeply, someone connected to his past journey. At first he hesitated to open it, unsure of what it might bring. When he finally did, he realized it wasn't a message filled with expectations or complicated emotions. It was simply a warm note, wishing him success and peace. Instead of feeling overwhelmed or confused, Adil felt grateful. It showed him that he had grown enough to look back at his past without fear. He no longer carried heavy emotions. He carried understanding, forgiveness, and calm acceptance. This small moment taught him something important. Sometimes, closure doesn't come from long conversations or explanations. Sometimes it comes from the quiet recognition that both people have moved forward in their own ways. He put his phone away with a soft smile, feeling lighthearted and calm. For the first time, he wasn't looking for answers. He was ready to create new chapters in his life. Adil decided it was time to focus on his future, his dreams, his goals, and the life he wanted to build. He started by setting up a small plan for himself. Each day, he would dedicate time to learning something new, something useful, something that would help him grow. He practiced new skills, worked harder than before, and refused to let self-doubt control him. Whenever he felt tired, he reminded himself that progress wasn't about speed. It was about consistency. As days turned into weeks, Adil began seeing results. Opportunities began opening for him, slowly but steadily. New people entered his life, some as friends, some as mentors, others simply as kind strangers who inspired him. He discovered that connection didn't have to be intense or complicated. It could be simple, respectful, and genuine. He learned to communicate with honesty, to listen without judgment, and to care without losing himself. One of the most significant changes came when Adil joined a small community group that worked on projects to support local people. At first, he joined just to keep himself busy. But soon he found joy in helping others, whether it was assisting students with their assignments, organizing small events, or helping the elderly with daily tasks. Adil felt a sense of purpose that he had never experienced before. The people around him began appreciating his dedication and sincerity. They often told him that his presence made things easier, calmer, and more positive. This experience greatly influenced his mindset. He realized that life was not only about what you achieve for yourself, but also about what you give to others. He discovered that true happiness grows when you become a source of ease and comfort for the people around you. It was during this time that Adil's confidence blossomed in a genuine way. It wasn't the loud kind of confidence that demands attention. It was the quiet kind that shows through actions, patience, and kindness. One evening, after completing a community event, Adil walked home slowly through the cool night breeze. The streetlights glowed softly, and the sky above was calm and clear. He looked up at the stars and felt grateful for the person he had become. He remembered the fears he used to carry, the moments when he thought he would never find peace, and the times when he questioned his own worth. But standing there under the quiet night sky, he felt certain that everything he went through had a purpose. His journey had taught him resilience. It had taught him emotional maturity. It had taught him that sometimes you must lose something to discover something far more valuable, your own inner strength. As Adil neared home, he noticed his siblings waiting at the gate, waving happily. Their innocence and joy reminded him of how far he had come. He joined them with a warm smile, feeling a sense of belonging that he once believed he would never experience again. His home, which once felt like a place filled with misunderstandings and pressure, had become a safe space where love flowed freely and conversations felt natural. The next morning, Adil woke up with a fresh sense of direction. He sat with his notebook and wrote down a simple line: I will continue growing, step by step, with patience and faith. This line became his personal reminder. Whenever he felt uncertain, he read it again and found motivation. With time, Adil started building a clear vision for his future. He planned his studies, improved his work skills, and developed a routine that brought stability to his life. More importantly, he learned to protect his peace. He no longer allowed hurtful words or negative situations to control his emotions. He developed emotional boundaries, not to push people away, but to keep his heart balanced and strong. His transformation became visible to everyone. People who once saw him as confused or emotional now saw him as composed and confident. They admired how calmly he handled challenges, how thoughtfully he spoke, and how respectfully he treated others. Adil didn't change to impress anyone. He changed to become the best version of himself. But in doing so, he naturally inspired others around him. One of the most meaningful moments came when his father sat beside him one evening and said softly, "I'm proud of you." These words touched Adil deeply. He realized that the journey he thought he was taking alone had quietly influenced his entire family. His growth brought them closer, made their home more peaceful, and allowed them to understand each other better. As days passed, Adil's story became a quiet example of strength, not the strength that comes from power, but the strength that comes from patience, forgiveness, learning, and steady self-improvement. He didn't claim perfection, nor did he pretend to have all the answers, but he had something far more valuable: the courage to keep moving forward, no matter how slow the journey seemed. In the final stretch of his transformation, Adil accepted that life would always bring challenges, but he now had the mindset to face them gracefully. He didn't fear new beginnings anymore. He didn't fear endings either. He understood that both were natural parts of life, each carrying its own lesson. He stood once more near the window where his journey had begun, looking out at the peaceful sky. But this time, he felt complete. He felt ready. He felt hopeful. He knew that whatever came next, he would face it with maturity, strength, and a heart filled with calm courage. Because the story of his past was no longer a weight, it had become the foundation of his future.